to hear the inaugural speech of the Honourable Martin Pritchard, and I take this opportunity to welcome his family and friends to the President's Gallery for this important occasion, and I particularly welcome the Honourable Ed Dermer, a former member of this chamber who is greatly missed, and his son Cameron, and also Senator Joe Bullock. Welcome to the Legislative Council. And I now give the call, members, before I give the call to the Honourable Martin Pritchard, I remind you that it is an inaugural speech, and according to the customs of the Council, the timer will not be used, and as a courtesy to the new member, the speech should be heard in silence. I give the call to the Honourable Martin Pritchard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy President. Firstly, I would like to take the opportunity to acknowledge and recognise the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet. It is with great humility that I rise to speak today, this being my first real contribution to this place. May I start by expressing my gratitude to the President, to the clerks and to all the parliamentary staff for their assistance and for making me feel so welcome since my swearing in. First and foremost, I would like to thank the electors of the North Metro region for their continuing support of the Labor Party and, in this particular instance, for me personally. I will work hard to try and justify the trust that they have placed in me. Before I speak a little about myself and the aspirations that I hold, I would like to acknowledge the work of those that have recently held this position before me. I have had the pleasure of knowing and collaborating with the Honourable Edmund Dermer and the Honourable Liliana Ravlich for nearly 20 years. During that time, I have seen the tremendous contributions that both of these fine individuals have made to the lives of all West Australians through their work in this place. I can only hope that I can emulate their drive and commitment in the years to come. Turning now to my own journey. I was born in 1959 in Lymington, near the New Forest in the south of England. We lived in a caravan park for the first few years of my life, but it was not long before we moved a couple of miles away to a council house in New Milton. Even at that age, I knew that my parents were doing everything they could to provide my sisters and me with the best home that they possibly could. As an aside, I believe that housing, or more particularly, the ability to build a home for your family, is where it all begins. It is where our young learn the fundamentals of life, where we first teach them right from wrong. I think that it is important to do all we can to hold on to the great Australian dream of owning our own home, but the quarter-acre block should be consigned to the pages of the history books. For that reason, I hold some real concerns about the reduction and, more recently, the proposed abolition of the first homeowner grant as it applies to established properties. I understand that it is proposed to continue for new housing, but in my view, this change may only contribute to the urban sprawl, particularly in the Northern Corridor. I think that the removal of any assistance for buying existing homes could have the effect of driving young families, those that are most likely to take advantage of the assistance afforded to owning a new home under the grant, further and further away from the support of their extended family, who are more likely to live in more established suburbs that are closer to the city. I would think that this change could encourage an increase in overall costs as we build more and more infrastructure to support the urban sprawl. I believe that we need to look at new initiatives that encourage high-quality, high-density housing within the boundaries of the existing metropolitan area. Initiatives that encourage 2, 3 or even 4 homes on that quarter-acre block, which is all of the infrastructure already present. I see some moves in this direction already, but we should do more. I see so many positives in taking a fresh look at what we are currently doing in this area that it will be something that I want to turn my mind to while I'm in this place. Anyway, back to my childhood. The family's next move was a little further than the first. On my 8th birthday, my father Ken, mother June, and my 2 sisters, Beverly and Teresa, made a life-changing voyage to Fremantle on the Fair Star to take up a new life in Western Australia. For those of you that take an interest in the different cultures that have chosen to make Australia their home, I can confirm that yes, it is true. We were 10-pound poms. I do not say that with any derision whatsoever, as I believe that Australian society has grown rich, strong, interesting and durable with the contribution of the different waves of immigrants that have arrived on these shores over the years. Of course, there were many challenges for my family then, as there are many challenges for all new Australians. But the tolerance, lifestyle and opportunities that are available in Australia are second to none. Coming from a predominantly Anglo-Saxon country like England spared us many challenges, such as learning a new language, learning new laws, or getting to understand a new culture. But we still had many other challenges to contend with. We had to build a new home, make new friends, and although things were similar, they were not always the same. What struck me most at that age was the distances people had to travel. Many of the old neighbours in England would have only travelled out of the village once a year when going on their yearly holiday. It was quite a shock to the family when Dad told us that he was going to some place called Tom Price to work, where he would only get back to Perth occasionally because of the distance. I still remember the shock when I finally looked at the atlas at school. I don't think even now many people in England could comprehend the standard daily commute of one of my constituents in the northern suburbs. During my time in this place, I hope to work towards reaching some consensus on how we might reduce the frustration that this daily travel creates. I would like to congratulate the opposition leader, Mark McGowan, for his continuing contribution to the debate on the problems that congestion causes families in the northern electorate. I think that his suggestion, as encapsulated in Metro Hubs, is a bold plan to bring jobs out to where we live, thus reducing the wasted time and pollution that occurs every day as we spend hours on crowded public transport or in our cars getting to and from work. We sometimes need to be bold if we are going to tackle the big issues that are having a negative effect on the families that we represent. It reminds me when I was young and my dad would take us kids to Perth to see a movie or to do some shopping or even to have lunch at a cafeteria at the Coles Variety. These days, all of this is available in our own suburbs, at our own local shopping centres. Of course, this does not make our Perth Lord Mayor very happy, but it does make it easier for families. It seems to me that in years to come, more and more of our jobs may be able to be located nearer to where we live. But again, I digress. The isolation that my parents must have felt with my dad working away was just one more sacrifice that they were prepared to make in an effort to buy and establish a home for the family. I feel I must declare my admiration to all parents, including my own, for taking such a leap of faith into the unknown for the sake of their children. In hindsight, it was probably this challenge, amongst the many, that led to my mother and father parting ways not long after our arrival. One would think of a divorce as being a very sad event, and it was back then. But when the result has been that they have both found loving life partners of their own, I find it difficult to think of it that way now. I feel lucky to say that I am happy to also call Catherine and Hans my parents, and I would like to sincerely thank both of them, along with my mum and dad, for raising me to the person that I am today. I, like many others, hold a view as to what an optimal family unit might look like, but my own upbringing has taught me that the most important components in any family are love and commitment. I enjoyed both of these in abundance throughout my childhood. Although I attended what I believe to be good public schools, being Hampton Park Primary and Hampton Senior High School, I was not a scholar by any stretch of the imagination. Indeed, I left school as soon as I was able on the pretext of trying to learn a trade. My first attempt at gaining this holy grail was as a timber machinist. Well, the fact that I still have all my fingers is not a testament to how successful I was, but rather that I parted ways with that career very soon after I started. If I was being kind to myself, I might say that it was by mutual agreement, but reality was that leaving school at that early age left me very much unprepared for the responsibilities of life as an adult. I think that it was my latter realisation of just that fact that led to my strong support of the planning and the provision of recognised traineeships as a further alternative to traditional apprenticeships or the university stream as a career choice. Until recently, I was the chairman of the board of the Retail and Personal Services Industry Training Council. Indeed, it was in this role that I first had the pleasure of meeting the Honourable Peter Collier when he was the responsible minister. I must admit to being very impressed by his passion and support. I would like to take this opportunity to wish the CEO, Norma Roberts, and the new chairperson my continuing support and good wishes for the future. My apologies for further digression. My father then tried to help, as he always did, by trying to teach me his own trade. Now, my father was a very good bricklayer, which is one reason why we were sponsored to come to Australia in the first place. He went many months trying to instill in me the skills required of his trade. Even now I can remember that he said of every job he ever did, "Martin," he would say, "it should always be straight, level, plumb, neat and tidy." Well, I know he was the best bricklayer in the world, but either he wasn't a great teacher or I was not that good with my hands. The intervening years have taught me, and my long-suffering wife, that it is most likely the latter. Which is why I decided to try and get a job in one of the service industries. I will say, though, that my dad did teach me a good work ethic, which has served me well in every job that I have had in the intervening years. My first job in retail was at Coles Variety, both in Melbourne and for a short time in Victoria Park. For a short time and then again in Victoria Park. Although I was grateful to have a regular job, what struck me most about my work environment was the inherent unfairness of opportunity. I will qualify that by saying that I know it is no longer the case now, but back in the 70s, a woman could realistically aspire to no more than a front-end controller. In contrast, even a young pup like me was put on the accelerated management program just because I was a man. People that know me will understand how badly this affected me. I am not a person that can embrace unfairness of any kind. I am not even a fan of positive discrimination, although I accept that it is sometimes necessary to achieve a fair outcome. There again, I also don't believe that the end justifies the means, which just goes to prove that there are no simple answers. All I can say is that at least I was able to recognise it for what it was, but unfortunately, as a young man I was back then, I felt helpless to tackle such an ingrained problem. Luckily for me, though, a job became available at a Hearns store in Perth. Although it turned out that there were other challenges, I can say at least that there was no inherent favouritism based on gender. I had been a union member at Coles, but it was at a Hearns that I first became active in my union. Little did I know at the time how big a part of my life my union was to become, but I will return to that shortly. It was also at a Hearns that I met the love of my life and the woman that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. Fortunately for me, they were one and the same person. My future wife Gina was working for the Lotteries Commission when I first met her. They had a counter on the ground floor at Ahern's back when they actually sold lottery tickets. Lottery tickets are probably one of the best indications of how fast-paced our modern society has become. Those that are a fair bit younger than me will not credit it, but we used to buy 50-cent lottery tickets and wait months for the results of that particular draw to be published in the local newspaper. A far cry from the almost instant gratification of lotto. I use the term instant gratification loosely, as I suppose that's what people feel when they win, a feeling that to date I am unfamiliar with. Anyway, I can't tell you how much money I spent buying lottery tickets before I finally found the courage to ask Gina out. I remember that for our first date, we went to the movies to watch a new release called Flying High, and then went to the Red Castle restaurant in Rivervale for a meal. Neither the cinema nor the restaurant is still in operation, but I remember that night like it was yesterday. I think we clicked straight away, but it was not till I found out that she had spent $50 just doing her hair that I really thought that this young lady might really be interested. Just to give you some idea of what that really meant, I can tell you that back then $50 was a significant part of a week's wage. Not that I have ever regretted it, but I can finally reveal that I also spent nearly a week's wage that night. All I can say is that I was very pleased to have one of the newly introduced bank cards that week. Things moved rather quickly from there, and I'm happy, proud, delighted to say that Gina and I have now been married for 33 years. It would be true to say that there has been no greater influence on my life than my wife. Even so, just for the benefit of any media that may be listening, I did have a life before marriage. I was a young man growing up in the 70s. It was a time of ridiculous clothes, annoyingly few Sunday sessions, petrol rosters, disco, and a funny type of innocence. I, for one, can truthfully say that I never inhaled, but I did down quite a few middies during that time. For those of you who can remember, and some of you who were there but can't, these were interesting times. But however delightful my formative years may have been, there is nothing that made me happier than my marriage to Gina and the children that have come from it. It was at this time that I really started to grow up and think about my future, or should I say our future. I was in a job I really liked, and I had met a young woman that I wanted to make a home with. When you get to that point in your life, you really start to think about the quality and security of your life. That also means looking at the status of your employment, because it is your job that allows you to provide the necessities of life for your family, but I believe that it also provides the backbone to any productive life. It was all the more important because we had decided that, if it were possible, one of us would stay home to look after any children that we may be blessed with, at least in their early years. Our resolve on this was put to the test sooner than we had anticipated with the birth of our first child, Jessica, almost a year to the day after our marriage. Although Gina took this first opportunity to be a homemaker, I was to get my chance a couple of years later with the birth of our second child, Danielle. So with my half of the marriage partnership at this time being to maintain a steady income into the household, I looked around my workplace with a critical eye. What I saw was worrying. I had a reasonably good boss, being the Ahern family, but I also saw that they had a propensity to hire well-connected socialites in positions of management in many of their high-fashion areas. And can I tell you, Ahern's had lots of high-fashion areas. Unfortunately, many of these people had very little human management skills, which is, in my view, often led to unjust outcomes when conflicts occurred. I also became aware just how low the union density was, which also suggested to me that there was no real balance in the working relationship. If there was no union and a manager gave you an instruction that you disagreed with, you were left with the 3 Ls: like it, lump it or leave. As you would expect, conflicts did not happen regularly, but they did happen. And what did you do when there was real disagreement? For example, maybe about how you had been spoken to, or working overtime on a public holiday when you wanted to spend time with your family. It was inconceivable that an employee would complain directly to their own family, or run off to the Industrial Relations Commission to have it dealt with. If you were not in the union, you were left with the 3 Ls. It was at this time that I again joined the Shop Distributive and Allied Employees Association, which is better known as the Shoppies or the SDA. I also started to take notice what the SDA did outside of my workplace. Back then, much of the improved wages and conditions were being accomplished by improving the underpinning state awards. I saw the new leadership team of Mark Bishop and Joe Bullock reinvigorating the union that had responsibility for looking after workers in one of the biggest employing industries in the state. Although my initial foray into trying to unionise fellow workmates at the Perth store was nothing to write home about, I was very impressed at the success that Mark and Joe was having at improving the status of shop assistants at that time. I was also very grateful because their work was having a direct impact upon my pay packet. Their success was even more important as I first moved into married life, then parenthood, and finally home ownership. It was not long into the marriage before I realised what Gina and I had was a true partnership. Gina initially did all the groundwork for buying our first home, then camped out in the front of a real estate office in what was then the new part of Heathridge for a couple of days and nights so that we could get the perfect block to build our home on. Truth be told, I'm not sure that we totally agree on what constitutes the perfect block, but it did become very proficient at building many retaining walls out of the old railway sleepers. Still, the fact that we had our own home was all down to Gina's hard work and persistence, and I love her dearly for that. I, for my part, was working fairly hard at the time in a couple of jobs, putting money aside for the deposit. So Sleep and I were strangers there for a while. One of the extra jobs I had during this time was working on the weekends as a waiter at the Bazookia restaurant in Northbridge. Sad to say, this restaurant is also not in operation and is now a car park. Just another sign of the changing times. With the move into a new home in the northern suburbs, I also transferred to the Ahern store in Karrinyup. What I found there was much the same as what it was like at the Perth store. Low union membership and the ever-present 3 Ls. Feeling that all that was really needed was some knowledge and advocacy from the union, I put my hand up to work as a workplace delegate. I knew in my heart that all the right components were there to achieve a fair workplace. You had a good employer and a responsible union, and I thought that all you needed was for my fellow workmates to support their union, and you would have an even playing field, which would then lead to more respect and fairer outcomes in the workplace. You can probably gather by now that I'm a big fan of democracy, and that totalitarianism is not acceptable to me in any form, even if you have a benevolent dictator. Similarly, communism is not acceptable either. I believe people should be given help according to their need, but people also need to be rewarded according to their effort. It was around this time that I met a young SDA organiser who fomented in me this growing feeling that shop assistants needed a strong, conservative union to work on their behalf, and shop assistants needed to reciprocate that support if it was all going to work. The organiser in question was a slightly younger version of the Honourable Kate Doust, and I would like to thank her publicly for showing me, by example, the pure joy that comes from a lifetime of service to working men and women. Well, one thing led to another. I was introduced to Mark and Joe, and I'm pleased to say that they provided me with an opportunity to spend the next 27 years of my life trying to prove the circumstances of shop assistance. But again, I'll come back to that in a moment. My marriage to Gina gave me the opportunity to add to my tally of parents. In this case, my parents-in-law, John and Nina Donio. They have been a source of good advice and unfailing support for me ever since I had the audacity to marry their eldest daughter. They were also immigrants to this country and interestingly also sailed here on the Fair Star on the voyage just before my own, travelling through the Suez Canal. My own family travelled the longer way around, past the Cape of Good Hope, which I must say was a fair bit rougher. Similarly, the Donios brought their 3 children, Gina, Fernanda and Raymond, to a new country to try and give them a better life. Theirs is a very interesting story from their origins in Egypt, but they have also had their fair share of tragedies. In 1989, we lost Raymond to a fishing accident. To say he was the light of our lives would be an understatement. Indeed, I did not think that John and Nina would make it through that sad time, but very slowly, with the support of their family, they survived. More recently, in 2013, we also lost John. I feel the importance of this day more keenly because of his passing, as this was always something that he had encouraged me to do. I remember him as a generous to a fault but never wasteful. I remember him as a good family man, a good Labor man, and a complete gentleman at all times, even asked for a glass or 2 of red wine. I miss him greatly. My marriage to Gina has also given me the shining lights of my life, Jessica, Danielle and Lucy. It is with absolute pride that I say they are the kindest, most generous and thoughtful young people that I have ever met. The fact that they actually don't mind spending time with the family has provided me with some of the happiest times of my life. There are to date 3 things in my life that give me meaning and overwhelming pride. I have spoken at length about the one that I hold most dear, my family. I would now like to talk about the second love of my life, which is my union, the SDA. As I have mentioned, in 1988, at the invitation of Mark Bishop and Joe Bullock, and with the encouragement of the Honourable Kate Doust, I started working for the SDA. Earlier, I spoke about the importance of having a job. Working for the SDA has been so much more than a job to me. It has given me the means to make a home and raise a family, but it has also done more than that. It has provided me with dignity, purpose, and the opportunity to fight for the same things for thousands of SDA members who work in the retail and warehousing industry. Through my work at the SDA, I have been lucky enough to have the opportunity of improving the lives of literally thousands of people, whether that has been by negotiating a fair exchange for their work for the workers' labour, or by saving a member's job, or even just by giving workers the courage to stand up for their own rights. The fact that I actually got paid to help people still blows me away. Although I saw this as reason enough to dedicate myself to the SDA and the union movement in general, I had thought that all of the great battles had already been fought and in most cases won. The living wage, initially through the harvester judgment, the 8-hour day and now more commonly the 38-hour week, long service leave, annual leave, sick leave, equal pay, penalty rates, minimum conditions of employment. The list is endless. How wrong that turned out to be. As I have mentioned, I started working for the SDA in 1988, and since 1996 it has been my privilege to work alongside the now Senator Joe Bullock as his Assistant Secretary, steering the SDA in this state at a time of great change. One of the first campaigns that the SDA was involved in during the early part of my employment was the fight to win the first 3% universal industry superannuation. This was first achieved at individual work sites and then later, more broadly, through the award system. That the union movement won this for all working people around Australia is a matter of tremendous pride and to think that I was part of it will remain one of the highlights of my life. It is also to the credit of the Labor Party that it took up the baton so that now all working people currently have an additional 9.25% on their earnings going into a fund to give them security and dignity in their retirement. That there will be problems as the baby boomers hit the retirement is no secret, but it took the Labor movement, both political and industrial, to do the initial heavy lifting to try and come to grips with dealing with these issues. It is obviously that there is still a lot more work that needs to be done in this area. Another successful campaign at the forefront of my mind was the fight against individual employment contracts, both at a state and federal level. Of course, this approach to the power balance between the employee and employer is an anathema to me and my sense of fairness. I remember representing a site of 300 workers in Osborne Park where the employer had introduced individual contracts. Indeed, I think they were the pin-up boys in this state for this type of employment arrangement. The fact that every contract was exactly the same did not seem at all ironic to the employer at the time. Well, it took nearly 24 months of advocacy on behalf of the majority of the employees to get rid of the contracts, but I am pleased to say that we are now on our 4th generation enterprise agreement with this company. Also, I think I would be safe to say that all parties now work together and try and achieve a healthy business that also provides good quality employment for its employees. Even more important to me is that everybody involved now feels that their voice is considered and respected. It seems a great pity to me that some employers think nothing of using the services of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry or other advocates, then decry the involvement of employee unions as some intervention by a third party. Thank goodness there are also many progressive employers out there that accept the fairness of employees working together with their union to improve their lot in life. Even now, the SDA is in the midst of a campaign to achieve 100% pay at 18 for its members. Although I personally believe that there is a place for junior rates for young workers to gain entry into the workforce, to expect an 18-year-old adult who takes all of the responsibilities of an adult to get paid as little as 70% of an adult wage is awful, and I commend my union for taking up this cause. I understand that thanks to the SDA, some progress has already been made with 20-year-olds in the retail industry now being paid the full adult wage, where previously it was 90%. As a senior official of the SDA, I had the privilege of working with many great people who have dedicated their lives to the service of retail and warehouse workers. I wish I could name them all, but time may not permit. I will content myself to name just a few that have influenced me most. I could not talk about great people of the SDA without first mentioning the late Jim Marr. Others that have also provided leadership and stability at the national level during my 27 years with the union include Joe de Bruyn, Don Farrell, Gerard Dwyer and Ian Blanthorne. I wish to thank them for the example that they have been and the friendship that they have provided over the years. I wish to thank Joe Bullock and all of the other officials, delegates and the Committee of Management of the West Australian branch that I worked with during my tenure for their support and hard work that made every day a great adventure. I would like to wish the new WA leadership team of Peter O'Keefe and Ben Harris all the best for the future. If you enjoy your new roles half as much as I have, you'll count your lives as well lived. I would also like to thank Stephen Price and the AWU and Tim Dawson and the TWU for their support over the years. I hope we can all continue to work closely, as we have in the past, on behalf of working people. It was when fighting the big union campaigns that I realised that working people needed more than just a strong union. They needed a strong political voice as well. This is not a revelation, as I'm sure everyone here knows, but it hit me like a bolt out of the blue. It was while working on big campaigns that I first thought that I might be able to make an even bigger contribution to the life of my members through a role in state parliament. I've spent a bit of time talking about the journey of my life, which I think is most important because it is within that story where you find the physical expression of my beliefs, experiences and concerns. These things are what drove me to a lifetime of service, which ultimately has led me to this place. I believe in simple fairness and equal opportunity for all. This is not a simple slogan for me, it is a way of living. And although there are not always simple answers, you usually know in your heart what the right thing to do is. This then leads me to the third great part of my life, the Labor Party. With the history I had and the views that I hold, and the fact that I admired such luminaries as Bob Hawke, Kim Beazley, Paul Keating, it was only natural that I look first to the Labor Party. I think that all mainstream political parties have to be a broad church to attract the support required to form government, but I seem to have found my natural home on the right side of left politics. I originally joined the Whitford branch of the ALP in the late 80s, before transferring to the Karratha branch when I did a 5-year north-west stint for the SDA. It was there that I first became actively involved in an election campaign. It was for the former Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, the Honourable Fred Reevling, to get him elected in his original campaign to enter politics as a member for Ashburton in the by-election back in 1992. We fought another successful campaign while I was there in 1994. I have continued to work on every state and federal campaign in the northern suburbs since the family returned to Perth in 1995. I've also been an active ALP member at all levels of the party, including being the current president of the local Kingsway branch. Of course, branches of the ALP work together quite closely, and I would like to take the opportunity to thank all of the branches in the North Metro region for being so supportive of me personally in becoming a member of the Legislative Council. If I may, though, I'd like to single out just a couple for special mention. I want to thank John Fragamini and Sanjoy Dar and the members of the Marangaroo Darts branch. I'd like to thank Andrew Vitlin, Suleiman Ali and the members of the Balladura branch, and Maureen Palmer and Jim Benson from my own Kingsway branch. I would like to thank my fellow parliamentarians here and in the other place for their gracious welcome and assistance since being sworn in. It is truly an honour to be amongst you. But in my heart, I am still just a family man. I'm a Labor man, but underpinning all, I'm a shop assistant that learnt fairly quickly that fairness could only be achieved by being proactive and not just accepting things as they are. In my case, it all started by being part of the SDA. I am looking forward to the next phase of my life, but I realise that it can only be built upon my past experience. The way that I have been raised is to always listen to an opposing point of view with an open mind, but to be forthright in putting my own case. I believe I have developed the skills required to make a valid contribution to this place. I have enjoyed my 27 years working in the union movement and see this as a natural progression to represent an even broader electorate. My motivation for running for a position in Parliament has a very simple genesis, and that has been instilled in me my whole life, and that is a sense of fairness and a need to reach out a helping hand to those that need it. I can think of no better place to do this than here in the Legislative Council, in the best state, in the best country in the world. I hope I can justify all the support that I have received by again following my dad's advice and work hard and look at every piece of legislation that comes before me with a critical eye to make sure that it is straight, level, plumb, neat and tidy. But most of all, I hope that everything I do in this place improves the lives of the people that we represent. There are probably plenty of people that I should be thanking right now, but I hope to do this in person over the next few weeks. But the last thank you, the place of honour, I save for my family. To Gina, my wife, to my girls, Jessica, Danielle, Lucy, I could have not made this without your support. To Dad, Kit, Mum, Hans and Nina, I would not be the person I am without your guidance. To Raymond and John, I know you're up there looking down and looking after me. To Teresa, Ron, Bev, Craig, Fred and Gary, and the rest of my family, I love you all dearly. Thank you, Madam President, and my fellow parliamentarians for being so generous with your time.